Okay, folks, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Just got a couple more folks in the waiting room I'm going to let in. If everyone wouldn't mind just muting yourself for this first portion of our session, that would be great. Okay, looks like everybody's here. Let me get my screen shared. Whoops. Sorry, folks, technical difficulties on my end. 1 second. Oop. There we go. All right, well, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for being here. This is our webinar on the Deschutes Trails Coalition's 2022 new stewardship grant. So hopefully you're all in the right place. Again, we're just really glad to have you all here joining us and to share with you all some more information on this great opportunity. I'm Shelby Knight. I'm the Resilience Planner with the Central Oregon Intergovernmental Council. And then we also have Jana Johnson here, the Executive Director of the Deschutes Trails Coalition. So we're going to be talking to you all today about this grant process, providing a bit of background on the DTC and this opportunity, and then walking you through some of the specifics around eligibility and requirements, types of projects we'll be looking for, timelines. We'll do a quick overview of the application itself, and then talk a bit about the next steps once projects are selected. And then we'll have about 10-15 minutes at the end for some Q&A. So before we dive in, I just want to go through some Zoom tools with you all. I know that many of you are familiar at this stage with this, but it's always good to get a refresher. So we're going to ask that you keep yourself on mute throughout the presentation. You can do that by using the bottom toolbar on the very left-hand side. You'll see a little microphone icon that you can click on and off to go on and off of mute. As questions come up throughout this first part of the presentation, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll either try to answer them in real time or bring them into that Q&A session at the end. And then during the Q&A, we'll ask folks to raise your hand if you have a question. You do have a virtual hand that you can use. So again, if you go to that bottom toolbar, you can select to raise your hand. And then you'll need to go back there and lower your hand once you've asked your question. I'll call on folks and ask you to unmute and then mute yourself once you're finished. You may also use the chat box during the Q&A as well. The session is being recorded, so we'll make it available on the DTC website for this project, along with a copy of the PowerPoint we'll be sharing with you all today. With that, I think that's all I have. So I will hand it over to Jana to talk more about the DTC and just in general, some more information on this opportunity.
Great, thanks so much, Shelby. And thanks everybody for coming today. A lot of familiar faces and a few that I don't know, so welcome one and all. So just a brief overview of the Deschutes Trails Coalition. We started in 2017, and we're a coalition of over 30 organizations, I think closer to 35 at the moment. And agencies comprising public lands, outdoor recreation, conservation, tourism, businesses, and trail user groups. And our mission is to work collaboratively to foster an exceptional regional trail system that is sustainably managed and balances the needs of people and nature. I think one of the greatest strengths of DTC is that collaboration effect, that networking, convening the many voices, and if not speaking from one unified voice, at least from a foundation of shared values, which is sustainably managed trails and the 4 pillars of sustainability, the economic, physical, social, and environmental pillars. And there's a lot more information on our website if you want to dig in a little deeper of what those things mean. But ultimately, we strive to create a culture of community-wide trail ownership and stewardship. Just a couple of big things that we've got going on, and again, more info on all the different things that we're doing on our website, but we've got the Dollar for Trails program, which is something that was started in 2018, and we're working with a few different lodging establishments and hoping to grow that program, adding $1 to lodging bills as people check out or when they register or make reservations. And those funds go directly to fund our small grants program. And we've been funding, I think up to date, it's about $200,000 worth of funding of trail projects, kiosk improvements, accessibility, equipment to build signs, really across the board. So that's something that we're really proud of and continuing to work on. And it's a great way to provide a stewardship opportunity for those folks that are visiting the area and staying at these lodging establishments, as well as the businesses that benefit by being that conduit, and then of course us in the trails community. Another big thing I'd like to highlight is our DTC Trail Crew pilot project. This year, we started a Trail Crew pilot project where we hired 2 trail crew, and they are mostly embedded with the Forest Service Trail Crew to add capacity, and then also to inform the next phases of this pilot project, which the ultimate goal is to stand up an independent shared resource trail crew within Central Oregon. So we're in partnership with the Forest Service at this point and looking for some funding opportunities in the future to do that. This first year, Travel Oregon donated funds towards this cause, as did Visit Central Oregon. So that's what's made that possible this year. So that's just a couple things that we're excited about. And then of course, this grant program is a huge opportunity and a very exciting opportunity that we have to take some funds from the county and apply them to trail and trail related infrastructure. So getting to the history of how this grant came to be, it was about a year ago, shortly after I began in this position, that it was made known that there was this surplus, if you will, of unallocated transient room tax funds. And so those are basically the bed tax, the tax that people pay at hotels when they stay. And because during COVID, the county was expecting such low visitation, they budgeted low in terms of what they needed to spend those funds on. And as we know, the exact opposite happened. Everybody came to Central Oregon. And so there's a much greater amount of transient room tax funds, TRT funds, in the pot than usual. So we proposed to the county in January that some of these funds could be used for trails and trail related infrastructure, and that DTC would be willing to be the administrator of that grant opportunity. And fortuitously, they decided to allocate $600,000 of unrestricted transient room tax funds to support this grant program. So I think it was a pretty easy sell. All 3 commissioners were on board pretty immediately, and there was some good discussion, but it was clear that they were all on board with this concept, understanding that, I think we all know that a lot of people come to Central Oregon. A lot of us live here in Central Oregon because of the trails, and that if the trails weren't here, it would be a very different picture, I think, economically, and just what people do when they're here. So they understood that connection. Like if we want to continue to have people come visit, we also need to take care of the resource that they are coming here to visit. So pretty easy logic to follow there, and grateful that they all supported that. So there's a funding gap that has been identified between what is needed on the trails. It's called deferred maintenance is the term that's often used, like that accruing deferred maintenance that you just don't get to, like on your house, for example. You start to see your roof is fading. Maybe you have a crack in one of your windows, and over time you need to replace those things or take on some of those bigger efforts to keep your house up to snuff. And it's the same on the trails. There's erosion, failed structures, clogged drainages, bridges that are out, all sorts of things that take quite a bit of effort and money. And so there's a funding gap in what is allocated every year to address those needs and what the actual need is. And so this is an attempt to fund that gap. So that's kind of the purpose behind this grant. One of the goals is really to capitalize on the flexibility of these funds. I mentioned that these funds are unrestricted, which is a very unique opportunity as far as grants go. These funds can be spent on anything. It doesn't have to be new construction. It can be funding environmental analysis, NEPA analysis. It can fund a design or a survey of a project. It can fund maintenance. It can fund construction of new trail infrastructure. So really, it's a unique opportunity in that it can fund a really broad variety of tasks and efforts to get to that contribute to our trail infrastructure. So the intention behind it initially, because it's a pretty large sum of money and because it is unique in all the different things that it can fund, the intention was to fund fewer high value projects. And we've really struggled with kind of putting an exact, dollar range on it. But the idea was in general to use these funds for larger high value projects, more complex projects, most likely, as opposed to like the smaller grant, like the $2,000 to $10,000 grant opportunities, which we typically fund through our small projects grant. So the idea is to fund these larger projects. That said, this is in its first year and it takes a lot of bandwidth to pull together all that's needed to apply for a grant for a large project. So, there, depending on how many applications we get, maybe there will be funds sort of left over from these bigger projects that then there might be a fit for smaller dollar projects. So we're a little bit loose on that. And so some of it we'll just see what comes in. So I would not let that deter you if you have a lower value project, but I would say, that 10,000 and below, maybe save that for the small projects grants. So the initial thought, or the initial hope, I should say, was that this would be a recurring grant opportunity. And we've recently learned from the county, and they've made some decisions on how they are planning to use these unallocated funds in the future. And it won't be through this grant program. The good news is that they're applying funds more, they're increasing the funds that are going to Visit Central Oregon. So you might know from, Visit Bend, they have the Bend Sustainability Fund that's funded with transient room tax funds. Visit Central Oregon is also setting up a grant opportunity, and the particulars of that are still being worked out. But that is another grant opportunity that will be coming online over the coming year. So nothing to despair there. Let's see. So who can apply? So federal, state, and local land management agencies are all eligible to apply, as are nonprofit organizations with trail-related missions, which many of you represent here. And then businesses that partner with land management agencies or nonprofit organizations. We just didn't want to close the door on businesses that might have an idea or something that they would like to see funded here. So pretty broad audience that can apply. For the minimum requirements, they first must be on public land or on private land with a public easement. So basically, we don't want it to be something that people have to pay to get into, that it's open to the public and accessible for all. The other minimum requirement is that it must be within Deschutes County. One caveat to that is if a project straddles two different counties, that's okay. The project, you can still apply for funds for the project, but the funds would only be able to be directed towards the work being done within Deschutes County. We'd like to, for a minimum requirement, we'd like to have a detailed work plan demonstrating completion of a project within 24 months. And really that's, like I said, if these are larger value projects, they probably have some complexity. And so we want to see that you've thought through all the parts and pieces and have an understanding. And so we have an understanding of all the parts and pieces that are part of that project, and that it fits kind of within a 24-month timeline to complete that. Of course, there may be exceptions, for example, like NEPA analysis. Sometimes that takes longer than maybe that 24-month period, depending on numerous factors, maybe the timing of a plant survey that needs to be done. It happens only once a year, or things like that. Sometimes, right now with contractors, it's really difficult to secure labor sometimes. So maybe that's a piece of it. So the ideal would be to have it completed within 24 months, but extensions may be applied for. So we'd like to have those conversations early on. If there's an expectation, or if you already know, like, this project that we're applying for would not be completed within 24 months because X, Y, and Z, and then we can talk through what that might look like. And then lastly, but certainly not least, is the approval of the appropriate land manager. We would like to have written approval that you've talked about the project, what you're intending to do, and that the private landowner or the land manager is on board with the project and what we're funding. Just going to check the chat here. Let's see. Oh, great. Yes, and from Christine McConnell at Visit Central Oregon, folks are welcome to reach out with questions about the pending grant program. And Christine left her email there at christine@visitcentraloregon.com. So thanks for that, Christine. Okay, so evaluation criteria. So we've broken them out into two entities. So there's the primary criteria, which is the required criteria. And then there is the additional criteria, kind of the not required but desired criteria. And before I get to that, Henry asked a question here. Can you give any more guidance regarding what you would consider a high value project? Would DTC rather fund 3 to 4 large projects or multiple smaller projects? Yeah, great question, Henry, and thanks for asking for that clarification. The ideal would be 3 to 4 large projects, but like I said, given the time frame, this being a grant opportunity that's come out with, in the last 6 months, that we don't know how many of those large projects people have had the time and capacity to pull together. So that's what we're shooting for, but I would not rule out smaller projects, but maybe keeping them out of that really like $2,000 to $10,000 range, like the really small ones. We're looking ideally for some higher value ones. So for primary criteria, what we'll be looking at is the project, does it align with DTC's mission and vision and one or more of the 4 pillars of sustainability that I referenced before and that are on our website? And our mission is generally pretty broad in terms of supporting a trail network regionally that is sustainable. We understand also that every project might not align with all 4 pillars. Maybe your project is focusing on diversity, equity, inclusion. Well, maybe that's not a direct tie to, say, the environmental sustainability of the trails, but it is supporting the social sustainability of our trails. So really, it's one or more of those, and it's going to really vary on the project. Completeness and ease of understanding of the proposed project, including relevant materials such as maps and photos. So this is a really important one when you've got a team, and maybe some of you have been in this position and you're looking through all the applications and the materials. You want to have a clear understanding of what the project is, where it's taking place, what's entailed, the budget portion of it, those things. So a required criteria really is to have a well put together application that's easy to follow, has all the relevant information that we need. And maps and photos, we've not specified like we need a 20-minute map or something very specific in that way. But what we'd like to see is if there's a zoom in of like the very localized location of the project, and then a zoom out a bit, just so that there's other pieces of context. Maybe it's a trailhead or something like that, so that we kind of have a general idea. If the zoom in is so zoomed in, that larger vicinity map will help us understand where it is on the ground. And then we'd also like to see proposed details of how the task will be accomplished and a project schedule. So for example, like if you are working with a contractor, maybe you lay out what things are being done by the contractor versus what's being done in-house, what skills might be applied to that, that you have within your organization or have access to, maybe if you're hiring them out, et cetera. So, and then we want to see that detailed project schedule. Again, understanding things shift over time, or maybe up front, you know that it's not going to fit in that 24-month period. It's okay, it's up for conversation and discussion, but we'd like to see all that mapped out. As far as the desired but not required criteria, other things that are of value in this grant program is that the project demonstrates collaboration. Obviously, that's what DTC is all about, and we've seen great successes as a result of that collaboration and coordinating across different user groups and entities to inform the project. So we're always happy to see that. If there are letters of support for the project or the organization, you know, like, hey, Central Oregon Nordic Club, we've seen them do so much great work. We know they have the capacity, you know, those kind of letters are welcomed. Or people that might be beneficiaries of that project that would appreciate that project being done. This is separate from like the written approval from the land manager or landowner. This is just like letters of support more in general for the project and the organization. We would be glad to see if the proposed project supports diversity, equity, and inclusion. Evidence of a contractor availability, if that is applicable in your situation. Maybe you could request a letter of commitment, something that says, yes, because I think we probably all worked with contractors, and especially right now, it's just such a tough market. So that availability is going to be key for keeping things on a timeline. Consideration of a maintenance plan as to how the amenity will be maintained in the future, especially if you're proposing something new. There's that kind of long range thinking that we want to be looking at too. Like, okay, so 10 years down the road or 5 years down the road, what does that mean when this needs more significant maintenance? Or is there enough capacity in your organization or others to take on the annual maintenance of something that's being constructed? It engages in volunteers, that is a bonus as well. And also leveraging other funding sources that could be used as matching funds. Again, there's no match required for this, but seeing that that greater collaboration, even in a financial way, is a bonus as well. So the types of projects to be funded, as I mentioned, these funds are unrestricted, so you can they can fund all different types of things. Some examples would be trail maintenance and construction. That could be new construction, it could be a reroute, it could be, you know, addressing a specific segment of trail that has seen a lot of erosion or overuse or has been impacted in some way. Environmental analysis, NEPA or otherwise. Road maintenance and construction. So maybe a segment of road that's, you know, accessing a trailhead that's been kind of prohibitive. Reports, studies, and strategic trails planning. So it could be a study on e-bikes or an economic report about trails, which we've already done that recently, but which is just a quick plug on that. There's a great report about the economic value of trails in Central Oregon. If you're interested, I'm happy to share that. It can be used for major projects such as paved path maintenance or construction, replacing trail bridges, other infrastructure needs, and then as well as the minor projects. And again, that kind of gets to Henry's question about, like, you know, are you looking for smaller stuff? I think this year we do have room for that in this grant program. So some minor projects would be welcome as well. And I think, yeah, Shelby, will turn it over to you for the timeline and dates.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Janet. Excuse me. So just a couple of important dates and a general overview of our timeline so that you all can mark your calendars. The application opens on September 12th. It will be open for 3 weeks, closing on October 5th. We really encourage folks not to wait until the last minute and to submit a day or two ahead of that October 5th deadline. It is an online application form. And we've all likely had an experience with computer issues before, I'm sure. I know I have in grant processes, and I've certainly learned from that to try to submit just a day or two ahead of time. We are not accepting, Word documents or PDFs of your application. So we are, really requesting that folks utilize that online application and make sure you know what it looks like and how to use it, and have your materials ready to submit that, hopefully well ahead of that deadline, if possible. And then we have a series of review committee meetings that are scheduled in October and November, where our review team will be ranking, scoring, and selecting those final projects. And our goal is to have final awards announced by December 1st. So after that, in December, we'll be working with applicants on grant agreements, with a goal of having those agreements in place by January so that folks can begin working on their projects under this grant. An overview of what's included in the application. Some basic information. Essentially, this comes from a lot of what Jana just covered in terms of the type of project, eligibility, the criteria that we're looking for, etc. So some general information, project summary, contact info, eligibility. I will say the eligibility piece is important. Through the online application, if you happen to select that you don't meet one of the main eligibility criteria, it actually kicks you out and says, it looks like you're not eligible to apply for this grant. So just double check on that, make sure you're filling that in appropriately. Success, barriers, intended outcomes of your project, alignment with DTC mission and the pillars of sustainability, project timeline, maps and photos, which we'll talk more about here in a second, project collaborators, who else are you working with on the project, that land manager approval, technical expertise, and contractor intent piece that Jana just spoke to. Public support, do you have public support for this project? Do you anticipate having public support for this project? Are there concerns with, maybe the public perception of your project? We just want to be aware of that so that we can help work through that with folks. Funding and sustainability, and then the attachments. So documents to have ready. And I actually apologize, that letter of commitment from contractors should actually be under the optional piece, as Jana noted. It'd be really great if you've had some form of communication with contractors that you're hoping to work with on this. Again, just given that we know that folks are pretty strapped for time right now. And within that 24-month timeline, it'd be great to have some form of commitment or schedule on that, but it's not necessarily required. But what is required is an outline of your budget, and that is provided as a template form that you fill in and submit. A project timeline, which again is provided as a template for you all. And then the 2 maps that Jana was talking about earlier. So the first, kind of zoomed in of your project location, or of the trailhead, or, whatever it may be. And then something sort of a larger vicinity map that's zoomed out so that we can locate where your project is in the greater area. You will have a choice within the online application to upload a document or to link to a map with a location. So hopefully that helps folks there as well. And then written approval in some form from the land manager and landowner, which is, different from your optional letters of support and photos and letter of commitment from contractors, which are all optional. I'm going to stop sharing really quick here and try to pull up the application itself, just so you all can get a sense of kind of what it looks like. We will be providing a Word document that outlines everything that's in the application that you can use to kind of build your draft before you input it into this online form. And that's because the online form will walk you through each question individually. So you'll be able to kind of pull together all of the pieces of your application and then submit it through this online form. Okay. Everyone seeing that okay? Jana, thumbs up that you can see the application form. Okay, great. So this is what it looks like. Again, it's going to walk you through question by question. So, once we publish this, again, we'll have a Word document kind of outlining some of this eligibility requirements again, and giving you some instructions for filling this in, and it will have each of these questions lined out for you. I wanted to get to just one of the ones that looks where you're uploading something so you know what to expect there, or that has a template form. So again, here's the project timeline. Most things are linked already in here for you, so it makes it pretty simple. Again, it'll be part of that packet that goes out as well. But you'll just click here and it will pull up a template for your project details table. And we'll have the same thing for the budget as well. Okay, let's get back to our PowerPoint here. And I will pass it back to Jana. Oops, sorry. Go through real quick.
No worries. So next we'll be talking about the award process. And so the application period closes on October 5th. And then over the next month and a half, we'll be meeting as with an advisory committee that we have established. And it's made up of 9 people, and we tried to get representation from throughout Deschutes County. So we've got a sister city council member, we have somebody from the city of Redmond, somebody from Deschutes County, Deschutes National Forest, Discover Your Forest, somebody from the Sun River Chamber of Commerce, somebody from Lapine, somebody from DTC, and then someone with a vast conservation background that's done a lot of awarding of grant funding over the years. So I feel like we've got a good representation of folks. We didn't want it to be just trails people. We wanted it to be people that are embedded in different communities within Deschutes County in different ways with different perspectives. So we've got a great group of people to work with there. And so through that, through those, they'll probably have 2 to 3 meetings as we're walking through the different criteria and evaluating these. And then once the recommendation is established by the advisory committee, then that will be brought to the DTC steering committee just for final approval. It won't necessarily be like a voting situation. It will be just making sure that there's nothing that we've missed and that we've got alignment there. And then we will reach out to everyone that's applied and let you know whether or not you've received the grant. And then from there, for those who have been awarded the grant, we will work together to complete the agreement paperwork. This part is still, we're still developing this right now, so I don't have really specific, I don't have like a document to share of what that will look like, but basically we will send out the grant agreement, we will get the signature of the awardee, and then it will come back to DTC, and actually it's Discover Your Northwest, which is our fiscal sponsor, that's who's managing all the funds and distributing checks and things like that. Get those signatures on it, we'll send you a copy. And then I'll be working with grant recipients individually to determine if funds will be dispersed in advance, or if they will be reimbursed, depending on, or a combination of both, depending on the timing of when those funds are needed, something that's needed to buy materials up front or that type of thing. And then reporting requirements will be pretty straightforward. Quarterly check-in, and a template will be provided just so that we can report back to the county and share the great successes that are happening with those funds. And it's just exciting to follow that progress. Included in that will be any expenditures, receipts, invoices, typical, tracking of what's been spent, so that we can reimburse those if that is the case. And then if it's something that, funds are being dispersed in advance so that the organization can buy, that the awardee can buy materials and things like that, and we can settle up those differences through that reporting process as well. Before and after photos, I think we can all attest to the power of the before and after photos, and especially with physical trail work like that, it's just such a great way at a glance to demonstrate what these funds have done for the trails in our county. So we really want to make sure that there's good photo documentation along the way. So we're requiring that as well. As I said, projects should aim to be completed within 24 months. During that time, if there are reasons that are popping up or unanticipated wrenches kind of getting thrown into the mix, then we'll have those conversations as early as we can. Would be appreciated to talk through that and adjust those timelines if needed. And then final reports at the end of that 24-month period. That 24-month period will start the date that all signatures are on the agreement. And so within 30 days of the end of that 24-month period, like final reports with all the before and after photos and any remaining things that are needed to reconcile any of the financial side of things. So yeah, that is, I think, about it for the awards process.
Trying to get to my unmute button here, wasn't letting me. Okay, yeah, thanks, Jana. It looks like, yeah, we've got a good 15 minutes or so for some Q&A. Linda's got it. Yeah, so if you want to start just by raising your hand and I'll call on folks. Again, you can also utilize the chat box. And yeah, we'll take about 10-15 minutes to do questions. So with that, go ahead, Linda.
All right. It's
Okay.
from Kevin.
It's actually, this is Kevin with 33.
Okay, great. Go ahead, Kevin.
I'm in charge of routes and technologies for what we do. What I want to get a clearer understanding of is, what are you defining as a trail? Because I see Kevin and I see Justin out here. And trails can be, let's take Justin's level 1 Forest Service roads, which are not typically traveled by motor vehicles, but are traveled by equestrians, hikers, hunters, runners, cyclists. Is a smaller dirt road or a double track qualifying as a trail?
I would say that it would count more as trail related infrastructure. If it's not, even if it's not formally a trail, it's tying into trail infrastructure in some way. Either it's and also we specifically covered that with the county as well in our proposal. Could it address roads that are accessing trails? So it's, and the context in that case was more like, people driving to a trailhead type of thing. But I think we're open to these broader uses. And I think, I've had conversations with Linda about this. There's impacts to, like, if say you're using a non-trail, that is a travel route, that's impacting the trail network in a sense. It connects to it in that maybe it's diverting use to, in the case of like gravel riding with e-bikes potentially. Okay, maybe it's diverting that use that is not allowed on the trail system onto roads, and therefore it's improving the social sustainability of the trails, or even the environmental sustainability if it's putting people on existing routes as opposed to like new trail construction or something like that. So yes, it's definitely a gray area, but I think we have the flexibility with this grant program to accommodate the gray.
Okay, and I guess I'm going to push a little bit more on that. And so I said we got the flexibility, and as we all know, writing a grant takes a lot of time, a lot of work. And so if let's say you're looking at the lower dollar amount of $20,000 or $30,000, but it's taking you 40 hours of time to put into that grant admin. I guess I want to know how, if it kind of fits, or does it really fit? Because you're putting a lot of work into something, and all of a sudden, if you're chasing something that's a marginal reach, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. If it's actually a physical possible reach, it does make more sense.
I would say it kind of fits. That would be my best guess. And I think, it really depends also on what the competition is within the grant program. Like, I think in my mind, and I am not the advisory committee on the whole, but in my thinking and in my engagement with building this grant program is that we'd love to see a variety of projects that represent different types of uses, that represent different geographies, throughout Deschutes County. And so, some of it is really honestly what your competition is going to be. And we really try, we understand, I think we've all been engaged in writing grants and know that it's a lot of work. And we really tried to streamline this process so that we're not, asking for township and range and all these things that we don't actually need. I think it's a pretty straightforward process. So I'm hoping that it won't be too cumbersome on the grant creation or admin side of things. Also with the reporting, it's not going to be really cumbersome reporting. We just don't need to be tracking things in a way that makes it cumbersome in that way. So I guess I would say I would encourage you to apply, no guarantees. That's, part of the grant game, so to speak. But I think it does kind of fit. Does that help?
Somewhat, kind of.
Short of a guarantee, I don't know what else I can give you.
I appreciate it.
I hear you, but
we
it's
understand.
also, as a small nonprofit, it's an easy way to put yourself out of business as a nonprofit by chasing grants that you don't get.
Yeah.
And so,
Okay, thank you.
And Jana, at the end, you're going to provide your contact information. And so, Jana, I think you're available for folks to dig into more questions after this session as well. So maybe that's a good place to
yes,
follow up too.
absolutely. Yeah, happy to chat anytime.
Okay. All right, Kevin. Yep.
Yeah, same thing. Can't find the mute button. I probably should wait till post, but mine falls under the same kind of question of, do I take the time to go for this? And I've even questioned it myself because my project is about cleaning up public lands for the continued access to all of our trails and recreation areas. But there is a reservation, being a very much focused trail guy as well, that should I be seeking out different funds from the county, Visit Bend and other things? I can't go to the sustainability project, but wondering if my public land stewards cleanup days are really applicable for this. I know it benefits Central Oregon as a whole, but that does not, it's sitting on the fringe. It's shovel ready. Everyone, I have a lot of support, but does this really apply? And should I be spending my time and effort elsewhere?
Yeah, I would say, similarly to what Kevin just asked, that I think it kind of fits. I think maybe we could talk more offline about like where the cleanup sites are and how they directly tie to like trailhead infrastructure or trail infrastructure. It's certainly a worthwhile effort. You guys have done so much with so little. It's really impressive. But as specifically relates to this grant, I think maybe we should talk through in more detail where those sites are, kind of the dollar amounts that you're looking for, and kind of the bigger picture of what you're looking at. Yeah, other funding sources, etc.
Yeah, it's definitely beneficial to Central Oregon. There are areas that are definitely more affected as far as trailheads in the surrounding area, in the China Hat region. But we have next year is a big chunk of going up into BLM, and there's not really recreation in that area. And so areas like that would nowhere near affect trail recreation, but are going to be a tremendous amount of work. And so I think part of me thinks about going to the county and going for other things that might be more applicable, and keeping this money towards trail focused grants.
Yeah, I think that's a good instinct. Because if it doesn't directly tie to trailhead infrastructure, I don't think it would compete very well, as much as I would love to see that funded. And I'm sure there's other willing entities. But yeah, I think this grant opportunity, it's focused enough on, specifically on trail and trail related infrastructure that would be kind of a hard sell, unfortunately.
Okay.
So we're going to take Henry's question, and then I've got a couple of questions in the chat, Jana, that I'll read out. So go ahead, Henry.
Sure, I'll try to be brief. I actually have two questions. So question number one is there any sort of preference for projects that are located in the national forest or connect to national forest versus something that might be more like an urban project or something that, you know, doubles as a trail slash transportation corridor?
It's definitely not limited to Forest Service, including, you know, BLM and other lands. But I don't think that's actually what you're asking, more the environment, the developed versus kind of
Yeah.
more wildland environment. I think that I think projects that connect to that larger trail network in a more direct way would be more compelling than something that is, I think that connection point, the transition point between, you know, a more urban or developed environment and the natural environment would be more compelling than a standalone project like that's not connecting to anything, that's like more in the middle of Bend, for example, something like that.
Sure.
Again, I think it does depend on, and I would love to talk more with you about specific ideas that you have that might bring a little bit more clarity to it, because I think it is kind of the intent behind this is trail and trail related infrastructure. So if these are trails, I think most people's minds go toward the, you know, the class 1, you know, dirt trails out in the forest. But I think what you're describing is also a fit as well.
Yeah, and I'm happy to follow up, Jana, with more questions. So, and then just my second question is, you said that there's like those 4 core criteria, and then there's desired criteria. Are the applications actually being scored on the desired criteria? Like, are there points awarded? Is it beneficial to try to check every one of those boxes, or is that more just hey, best practice and grant application sort of thing?
I would say that it's the scoring, like points, there's an element of that will be part of our the evaluation process, but it is pretty subjective. So I don't think from like a point standpoint, I don't think it's like try to hit as many of these as you can. I think what we're trying to tease out are what are these other things that we find of value that this project embodies.
Understood. Thanks.
Okay, great. So Jana, a couple questions in the comment box. Linda asked, do you have a map of what you consider to be trails in Deschutes County? So we are able to look at how our routes tie into, I think, the greater area of trails.
I don't have access to a map, but it seems, gosh, if you have a friend that is GIS savvy, that could pull, you know, a few layers of the county layer and then trails layer, and maybe someone in this group has access to something like that and would be willing to share, but I don't actually have that.
Okay.
I think, yeah, having like the Forest Service layer of trails with BLM, local and state trails, and overlay that with the county. That's kind of the best that I can recommend.
All right. And Scott asks, you mentioned NEPA studies qualify for this grant program. Do you see qualified NEPA studies coming only from the Forest Service or government agencies? Being that the Forest Service has warned that non-Forest Service funds used for NEPA studies is not necessarily a good use of funds, as there are no guarantees. It goes on, so I'm going to ask the second part of this too. Do you see a joint effort with the Forest Service on a NEPA study being a better, more qualifying use of grant funds, for example, as part of a large trail plan?
So what I would say, I'm just going to read your question one more time as I'm looking at this. Yeah, I think with NEPA studies, the conversations that we've had with Forest Service leadership is that they are open to contract NEPA. I think there are some, I don't know caveats, but some sideboards and some hesitation depending on the project and depending on what piece of analysis is being funded. In general, I think the Forest Service is seeing, and this is just, I don't want to be speaking for the Forest Service here, but this is my impression from my time with the Forest Service as well as recent conversations, is that there's limited NEPA capacity. They are currently staffing up in that realm, but not fully staffed up yet with the fire and infrastructure, wildland fire and infrastructure funds that are coming to this part of Oregon. There have been some great successes with contract NEPA, and some folks on this call have experienced that where they've independently funded NEPA. So I wouldn't say that across the board it's considered not necessarily a good use of funds. As far as the guarantee part goes, no, there are no guarantees. Typically what I have seen with NEPA is that if you do your homework up front, the pre-NEPA, getting a sense of what are the, throughout the community, what are the knee jerks to this? What is likely going to pop up that could be an issue? And if you go through that process and kind of vet that out before you're actually in the NEPA process, and a lot of that is just conversations with the Forest Service, it's conversations with the specialist, finding out where there are sensitive areas and things up front. And it's pretty unlikely in my experience that you go through the NEPA process and nothing happens. No project. It's a process. Maybe there's some tweaks and things like that. So there's no guarantees that you're going to get exactly what you want, or we're hoping. But in my opinion, it's pretty unlikely that it's going to be just like, well, we just spent $200,000 doing that, and there's no project or anything coming out the other side of it. But those projects, obviously, as with the other ones, Forest Service being on board in that Forest Service approval and working really closely with them is key to pursuing this, to figure out, okay, is contract NEPA the whole thing in favor, or are they comfortable with maybe hiring out the heritage report or wildlife, things like that.
Okay, thank you.
Then,
Linda, I saw that you had your hand up, but it's no longer up now. Okay, great.
I'm just looking at the second part of Scott's question. Do you see a joint effort with the Forest Service on a NEPA study being a better, more qualifying use of grant funds? I'm not sure if I know. I'm not completely clear what you're asking there, Scott.
Yeah, sorry. I've been on off video because I'm just not in a great area. I'm just trying to understand how you see potentially funding a NEPA study as part of this project. And because we're obviously talking to the Forest Service about a number of different potential projects, some of which most likely won't actually need a full NEPA study, but we're just trying to get a sense of, based on their workload and how detailed some of these projects might be, and helping with potentially some funding and coordination through this grant might be the lift where we get more approval or movement from the Forest Service at the moment. Kind of dangling a little bit of that carrot out there with them, that we're going to be assisting in this process and maybe helping funding some of the projects that we're looking at together.
Mm-hmm. And I might not be on target here, but if the NEPA being done, even if it's, a categorical exclusion or something that's, a less cumbersome form of NEPA, depending on the action being analyzed. If you're asking to fund that NEPA and then the project that the NEPA is being done on, we wouldn't be able to do that because we'd have to have that NEPA approval done first before funding a project. But it could be, maybe it's one part of a larger trail plan, like, hey, we want to do this, and then your plan is to, to do this piece of NEPA, and then you want to, look in the future at funds to fund the implementation of it, and showing that might be a compelling thing to demonstrate.
Okay, great. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
All right, we've got time for one or two more questions. I see Kim just popped up in the chat. Hi, Kim. When do you anticipate that the Word version of the application, budget, etc., will be available? So, Janet, I can speak to that briefly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. But it will, when we announce that the grant application is open, those materials will also be published at the same time. So that's that September 12th date. when the whole packet will go out in terms of the application, the documents for the budget, and the schedule, and then the online application will be published and open and ready at that time as well. Okay, one more question before we got to close out here soon. Rika says, do you have a sense of how many applicants you will have? Is there a ceiling to how much one should ask for? Jan, I'm going to let you take that one.
Okay. I don't have a great sense now. I mean, at the moment, I'm thinking, I don't know, maybe 8 applications that I know of that I'm anticipating coming in that I've talked with folks about in one way or another. As far as dollar amounts go, just kind of in keeping with that, like we've been reluctant to put any firm dollar amounts on anything, but I know that that's a little bit challenging to work with, and I understand the desire to have a number. So I'm going to say, like, this is not hard and fast, but generally, like, you know, $150,000 to $200,000 on the upper end would be desirable. If we're looking at like 3 to 4 big projects, you know, in that, around that, those dollar amounts, that's kind of what we were shooting for. Again, it really depends, you know, this is, people haven't known about this grant opportunity for very long, and just knowing that it can take a lot to pull together some of those high value projects, that there's room for slush in that, because we're not really sure. Like, I think it would look different if we were in our 5th year of this grant and people knew way out in advance to be planning for this. So yeah, I would say around, you know, 150 to 200,000 is probably kind of in that ideal range, but we would consider projects if it was above that as well, but probably want to talk that through.
And Jana, you mentioned earlier in terms of kind of like the low area of this, like $50,000 projects, also looking pretty good. And, you know, again, something under maybe 10,000 might better suit some other grant programs, but we're certainly willing to consider them. Is that accurate?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that one more time?
Yeah, that's okay. So Rika asked for the ceiling, and I'm just clarifying kind of the range more directly for folks. So, you know, in my mind, in our conversations, it's been kind of like 50,000 to 150, 200 is probably the range that we're looking for. But again, we'll go a little bit higher or we'll go a little bit lower. If you're in that 10K range, you know, maybe consider reaching out or looking at some different programs potentially. Is that accurate? Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, well said.
Okay, folks. Well, we're right at time. Jan, I'm going to get you to this last screen here with contact information and let you close us out.
All right. Well, thanks again, everybody, for coming. If there are additional follow-ups that you'd like to talk through, and, you know, follow-up questions, talk in more detail about project ideas, I'd love to hear from you. I can be reached at DeschutesTrailsCoalition@gmail.com. And if you want to go to our website and see more about what we're working on, or any of the grant information, if you want to revisit this webinar, then you can also go there to find it. And Kim just asked, you know, when will the recording be available? Do you have an idea, Shelby, of when that could be on the website?
I don't. Let me say within a week, we should be able to get that up there.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think it should. I think, yeah, half of that is yours and half of that's mine, because I think you'll have access to the recorded file, and then I'll need to get it on the website. So yes, I think we can commit to between the two of us within the week, and hopefully sooner. And I can send an email out when we put it up there, just to the whole mailing list that was made aware of this workshop too.
And then Scott asked, could this PowerPoint be shared directly for review? I think the PowerPoint is much easier to get up on the website, Jana, so we could do that here
Sure,
soon.
yep, we can do that. Yeah, so just, yeah, thanks again. This is a really exciting opportunity for DTC, and you know, the most exciting part is envisioning like a year or two from now what this will look like on the ground. So really excited to have the interest and the community that we have that has the capacity and interest in moving these things forward. So reach out if there's anything that you'd like to chat about. Thanks for your time, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks,
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.